welcome back. Good to see you. Um, Many of you I've gotten a chance to sort of interact with a little bit in this first week via email and other things. It's good to get to know you all. I hope you're sort of settling in for the summer, right? Again, summer moves fast, and we're now in week 2, which means things are happening, right? This week you have a rough draft due. Don't worry, we'll cover it today or this week in these lectures and get you started on that. Few things first. I'm seeing most of you I've gotten blog addresses from, and I've followed you, and I've started to read your blogs, and those are great. Keep it up. If you haven't sent me your blog address, do that as soon as possible. I'll be sending out an email later today on Monday to those people who I haven't heard from, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and getting things done. I will be commenting on your blogs occasionally, so look for that. I'll also be grading your reading quizzes from last week, getting those back to you, and doing lots of other things this week. But let's get started. This week we're going to have several video lectures. This first one is going to cover part of the reading for this week, and basically the big ideas about research, the kind of research that I want you to do for Essay 1. The second video will cover writing, basics of writing and getting those drafts started, as well as requirements for the draft that's due this week. It's not a full paper, you just have to have a few pages and some basic ideas. So the requirements for that will be in the writing lecture, the second lecture. There will also be a video lecture about, or not really a lecture, just a video about how to submit things to the online classroom, as well as how to engage in the discussion board post. So if you haven't done that before, there will be a video covering that to make sure that you know how to do that. But this video is going to cover research. We're going to talk about what's required of you for Essay 1 and why I've required it of you, and then we're going to look at ways to do research for this assignment and what doing this research for this assignment tells us about doing other kinds of research like you'll have to do later on in this semester. So before we get started with that, I do want to just kind of warn you and apologize that I live right above the swimming pool at my apartment complex, and there are people out there having fun, as I wish I could be, and I'm sure you wish you could be. So if you hear screaming and yelling and things like that in the background of some of these videos, it's people having a good time. So we can be jealous of them, and then get inspired to get our work done so that we can go outside and have a good time too. All right, well, let's get started with this video thinking about the assignment and the kind of research that I want you to be doing. Okay, in this video, the first of your videos for this week, we're going to look a little bit closer at the Essay 1 assignment, hit some highlights, make sure you have a clear idea of what's expected of you, because remember, you do have a draft due this Friday. We're also going to think about some basic research questions for Essay 1. As you'll read about this week, the research question is the one of the most important first steps of coming up with your paper assignments for this class. We're also going to talk about how to find sources for Essay 1. I've specifically designed this assignment to be easy for you to do good, appropriate, critical research, because I wanted to also illustrate the difference between good critical sources and not so good sources. So I'm going to show you how to find good sources and some of the differences between good sources and bad sources, which will help us come up with some rules for evaluating sources. So let's get started. Assignment sheet here, just to make sure that we have a really good idea of what's going on. The assignment is pretty simple, I think, and it's specifically designed to be generally pretty easy for you to do quickly, in terms of the sorts of sources that you're going to need for this assignment, and the assignment itself is designed around something that you should have some interest in already, right? Because you're going to choose a movie or television show that you either really like or that holds significant meaning for you, and I'll let you figure out what that means. But choose something you want to talk about, right? You're then going to expose that to other perspectives by researching the chosen text and seeing what credible, critical audiences have to say about it. And so these are the things I'm highlighting are essential things to keep in mind. A minimum of 3 sources, including at least one that offers a different perspective than your own. Oh, well, I didn't highlight that very well, did I? Right. So 3 sources, at least one that you disagree with, You will write an essay that offers your informed evaluation of the text and supports that argument with thoughtful incorporation of an analysis of the critical conversation that you found in your research. So, to boil that down, in other words, you need to pick something, a show or a movie that you like, find 3 critical sources, see what they're saying about it, and use that research and your knowledge of the show or the movie to develop an argument about it. That can be anything as simple as, this show is one of the greatest shows ever because blank, blank, and blank, or you can get a lot more complex and talk about specific characters and things like that. We'll look at more ideas for that later on today in the other video about writing, especially. Okay, so these are the basic things you need to know. The basic things you need to be focusing on in this assignment sheet, and then obviously look over your criteria, your formal requirements, and of course your due dates. The rough draft is due this week, this Friday. We will be talking about that in the second video lecture for this week, the writing lecture. I'll give you specific requirements for that. Basically, let me just, calm your fears. You only need about 2 pages for your rough draft this week, but I'll get to that in the next video. So what do we want to talk about now? I want to move from this assignment sheet to how we get started with a research paper like this and how we find sources specifically for this assignment. So let's do that now. So now that we've got a good feel for the assignment, let's start to think about some questions that we want to begin to ask. First of all, a research question is just basically what you want to know about your topic. Of course, it can and probably should be many questions, more than just one. And it will, of course, evolve throughout the research and the writing process. One of the most important things that you can do in this class this semester is learn to be adaptable so that you can approach your sources and your arguments and your perspective always with a willingness to evolve and to grow. So right now you may have specific questions about the TV show or the movie that you're choosing, and you may have specific ideas about it, but I want you to be open-minded as you go into your research and allow the research to help guide you into a really good argument about this text. Some basic questions to start with, though. Basic introductory questions. Why do I like this movie or TV show? Why is it so popular? Or perhaps why is it not more popular? You may be choosing a very popular movie or TV show that you like and that lots of people like, or maybe you're one of those fringe characters that likes things that not everybody else likes, and you want to explore why you like it and why maybe other people don't, right? And of course, the really important questions is, this is a research class and we're really focused on learning how to do good scholarly collegiate research. What do critics think about it? Critics are the experts here, right? So what specific aspects of the film or the television show do critics talk about? Like characters, dialogue, formalism, whatever. Sometimes they just talk about the way it's shot, sometimes the way it's written, sometimes the adaptations or whatever. And then what sorts of references do critics make when discussing this movie or television show? If you understand what the critics are talking about, that's going to help you figure out what you're talking about, right? So these are some basic questions to begin to ask. And once you have some questions in your mind, then you can start to do some general research. So let's look now at how to find good sources, good critical sources for this paper. Before continuing this video, I want you to go ahead and get some reading done. So read chapters 44 and 45 of the Norton Field Guide before coming back to this video. You're going to, in those chapters, focus on the distinction between primary and secondary sources, how to identify scholarly sources, doing some effective searching, as well as how to determine reliability, how to read sources critically, and think about what you read last week. So go do that reading. Pay attention to these things. What are the differences between these types of sources and how do we find these sources? And then also go and read the Research the Basics reading on my blog. When you've done that, come back to the video and we'll start looking at how to find good sources for Essay 1 based on sort of the rules that you learned in your reading about how to identify scholarly sources and how to do effective searching and determine reliability and things like that. So go do that reading and come back. Alright, so let's look at how we might find sources for this particular assignment. I've specifically designed this assignment the way I did because I want it to be easy for you, but to find sources quickly, good critical sources. But I also want it. I think it's a good way to illustrate the difference between good critical sources and not so good non-critical sources, so that when you move on later in the semester to your more complex assignment, your larger research project, you'll have an easier time differentiating between the two if we look at some of those distinctions right now and come up with a good, clear set of rules for what makes a good source, right? So you've gotten some idea of that from your reading both in the Norton Field Guide and on my blog, but let's go ahead and get a feel for it by doing some research, right? So I'm a big fan of The Office, and I'll just pretend I'm writing a paper about The Office, right? So let's see, The Office. Let's go ahead and just start by saying The Office reviews, see what comes up. These are all interesting stuff, and we'll look at some of this in a minute. But I want to start by looking at the kind of things we don't want to use in this paper, the kinds of things that we don't want to be citing in our scholarly essays, which are fan reviews, non-critical, non-professional reviews. Now obviously you know not to use these, I hope, and we'll look at the kinds of sources you can use here in a minute, but I want to use this example. The reason, again, this assignment is designed to be used as an example, so that we can see here why this sort of source doesn't hold water in a college class, or any sort of academic research, right? We can see a perfect example right here at the beginning of this website. The first two things we have: first, we have somebody calling somebody else a moron, right? And then we have the supposed moron here, and his or her review. Obviously, one of the first things we notice is we don't know who these people are. We don't know what their names are. We don't know what their background is. We don't know anything about them. So they're obviously not credible sources, right? They're obviously not experts in the field that we should trust for any reason. But we can also see that by looking at them, looking at the reviews, right? They're just ridiculous. There's no sense of scholarly or critical thought being placed. It's just knee-jerk reactions and emotions and bad grammar and things like this, right? So Kitcopy, I guess that's how you pronounce that. Kitcopy's review here. All this show is a bunch of awkward people in an office with an even more socially defective boss. It's all awkward humor where you laugh at them. I hate awkward humor. It makes me cringe. This show gives me goosebumps, and not in a good way. I never understood how there are parts where each character narrates directly to the camera, like Big Brother. Not a show I would watch at all. Avoid if you don't like awkward humor. Right, so that's obviously not a good review. That's not something we want to cite in our in our paper at all, because it's mindless. It's mind numbing as well. The grammar is terrible. There's no understanding of the basics of the television format or of humor itself. I'm a scholar of humor. I can tell you that awkward humor is not a classification that we use in any real discussions of humor. You know, here I never understood how there are parts where each character narrates directly to the camera. Obviously, this person just doesn't understand the form that The Office is playing with, the mockumentary form, right? So, this is obviously an irrelevant source. We wouldn't want to use this, but it highlights, it's a good example of the kinds of just kind of crap you'll find on the internet if you're not careful, right? So we know to avoid this, but you'd be surprised. Sometimes I do get papers citing things like Kitcopy and Leon 664. So don't be those people, right? This is not what we're looking for, but it's a good example of why we don't want to use it, because it's just it doesn't add to the conversation. It doesn't add to our understanding of anything. This is just someone's reaction to something that upset them, and that's not the kind of things we want to engage as scholars. We want to engage good critical thought. So what is critical thought? What does that mean? Let's look at some examples of it. I'm going to go back and just type in the name of the show, The Office. Of course, the first things that come up, its official website, Wikipedia, and then IMDb is always a good place to start. Because here at IMDb, yes, you do have some wonderful user reviews that are not much better than copies in a lot of ways, but you also are given access to the critical reviews. So these are all obviously professional critics, right? From well-respected and well-known blogs and journalism sites. We'll just click on the first one, the San Francisco Chronicle, and you're going to see here a good example of the kinds of things that you should expect to find in a critical source, whether it's about a movie or TV show or about anything that you happen to be researching as the semester goes on. This is, first of all, there's full disclosure here where this is published in the San Francisco Chronicle, right? We know who the author is, we have dates, we have all these things that say this is a good critical site, something that we can trust, right? So, all right, here we have a good review by a quality critic, and we can, here are just some things to notice right off the bat that point out the critical nature of this. First of all, we have in the first paragraph a reference to Citizen Kane, right? Which is critically believed to be the best film ever made, right? So here we're already entering into a larger critical conversation about films and about what is going on in the whole entertainment industry, right? We see lots of reference to the original British version. We see references to other television shows. So there's a building of context here, right? And so that, again, that's also a good source of critical. A good way we know that this is a critical source. Then we also have, remember in that amateur review, the person didn't understand how or why the characters in The Office talk to the camera. Here we have this critic does understand that. So, he's part of the critical conversation, right? He's speaking the right language. It will remind you that The Office is simultaneously depressing and joyously hilarious, a kind of Dilbert meets Curb Your Enthusiasm by way of This Is Spinal Tap. And now as you get more immersed in these sorts of critical conversations, what you'll start to understand is the context that a sentence like this gives, right? So if you've read Dilbert, which is a comic strip about the workplace, and you've seen Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is, Larry David's sort of tragic comic awkward humor, that's not really a term, thing on HBO, and This Is Spinal Tap, which is one of the original mockumentaries, then you understand that this sentence is placing The Office within a larger critical conversation about a lot of different types of film and comedy. So these are, again, traits that we see in a critical source, and that's what we're looking for. Anyway, there's a lot here to absorb, there's a lot to look at, but just looking at some of these little things that happen in a good critical review, we have lists of actors and characters. There's actual information. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction, right? This is somebody who's put a lot of thought into what they've written and what they're writing about, and that's the sort of source that we're looking for. So again, this assignment is made to be easy for you to find those sources. All you have to do is go to IMDb and find a good critical sources. That's fine, but I want you to pay attention to what those critical sources look like so that you can start to recognize them as you see them anytime that you're using the internet, so that you're not those people on Facebook who post fake things, right, that aren't really happening. We need to learn how to read this technology critically, read these texts critically in order to use only the best information. I like IMDb. You're probably also familiar with Rotten Tomatoes, but if you're not, let's just look at it really quick. Go to The Office, Rotten Tomatoes. The one really nice thing about Rotten Tomatoes is, remember, you do need a source that disagrees with you, right? And Rotten Tomatoes makes that really easy. Because as we go get in here and look at the critical pages, we will find, where are the reviews? Here we go. Anytime you see a tomato, that means this is a person who likes the show. And anytime you see a splat, that means this is somebody who doesn't. So if you need to find a source who disagrees with you and you're writing about a show you like, go to Rotten Tomatoes and read one of those articles. Make sure it's a good critical article, like Matt Roush from the TV Guide, that has a splat. Read that, see what they have to say, and that'll give you something to argue with, right? So that Rotten Tomatoes is very helpful in that way. All right, anyway, let's go back and make sure we have a good, clear idea of what kind of sources we're looking at, and talk more about this assignment. All right, some things to pay attention to, just in general. These are good rules to have as you're doing any kind of internet research. Always pay attention to the language being used in a review, the diction, word usage. Make sure that people are spelling things correctly and using good grammar and being professional. If they're not, it's probably not a good scholarly critical source, right? That's a basic couple of rules. Pay attention to the source. Where is it coming from? If you can't figure out who's saying this, if you can't figure out where this is coming from, then you need to question that. What kind of credentials do you find in these sources? That's always important. Always look for bias, and be aware of your own bias as well. Just because you agree with something doesn't mean that it's always right. It doesn't mean that it's not biased. It could just be that you're also biased, right? So be very aware of that. If you find a source that is just completely dismissing everything offhand, and not really engaging it, if you find sources that are clearly just reacting emotionally to something, be suspicious of it, right? Always be aware of that. And finally, pay attention to the sorts of examples that sources use. A good scholarly source will use lots of good examples. They'll, mention Citizen Kane and This is Spinal Tap and all sorts of things, right? So pay attention to that. Good sources will use lots of examples. Bad sources will just generally be some sort of unfounded claim, some hasty generalization, something that is a reaction rather than the result of good critical thought. All right, hopefully that's answered some of your questions about Essay 1 and the research that's required of you. To find out more about the writing that's going to be required of you this week in terms of your rough draft, go ahead and go watch the next lecture, the next video for this week, which is available in D2L, and that'll be specifically about writing. So I'll see you in that video. Talk to you later.